1976 was the best year in heavy metal and hard rock history. And so 1977 has a tough act to follow. And while they don't match it in quantity, as many of the big bands of the 70s kind of take a step back, they do at least match, if not exceed, 1976 in the quality category. Because several of the new bands that are on the scene are going to put out awesome albums. The cream of the crop really steps up in 77. Who is that cream of the crop? Find out next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. Tonight, we take an in-depth look at the best music of 1977. Now, 1977 is a bit of a strange year in that many of the bands that we have been focused on take a bit of a step back. Don't put out the kind of quality that we're used to. Who am I talking about? Aerosmith, who have just come off really two of the best albums of all time, Toys in the Attic and Rocks, followed up with a little bit of a disappointing album in Draw the Line. UFO, a band that I think has one of the best runs of the 70s, kind of misses the mark this year. Thin Lizzy, who has been just a hit machine, just came off the very successful Jailbreak, and the critically acclaimed Johnny the Fox, they kind of take a step back. And so many of these artists that we're discussing are not going to make it into that cream of the crop. However, the quality of 1977 is one of the best years ever, as there are several bands that have come out and put their strongest albums out to date. Many of the bands that are coming on in the later part of the 70s are really finding their stride. And boy, these albums that we're going to discuss tonight are amongst the best in heavy metal history. So let's get to it. And let's start with Newcomer of the Year, because there are a couple of very interesting picks to discuss. "1977 Newcomer of the Year." We have two selections I want to talk about today. Both are amongst my favorite bands of all time, and both are represented on the wall behind me. The first, Motorhead, the original trio of Filthy Phil, Fast Eddie Clarke, and of course Lemmy. They produced their first album this year, and while it's not their best, Motorhead is like many heavy metal bands. They're going to get better as they go. There's still some great highlights, and you can really see the talent and what's to come from Motorhead. A very interesting album, again, not their best. The second Newcomer of the Year, also featured on my wall, Riot. They also put out their very first album, and it is also not their best, as they are also going to find their stride as they go. And just to throw in there, have one of the all-time worst album covers of all time. Riot and their Seals. I'm not sure what was going on there, but this first album cover is a doozy. Anyway, it's interesting in that both of these bands are great. Both of these bands are going to find their sound and find their popularity a little bit later in the catalog. So it makes for a really tough choice. In this case, though, I will have to give the award for 1977 Newcomer of the Year to Motorhead. This is a little bit better of an album, and I think it really, while Riot is also going to find their stride later, by the time they get to Fire Down Under, much different band. They really become a much heavier band. While as Motorhead, you see what they're going to be already. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of speed already coming out. So I give the award to Motorhead for Newcomer of the Year. Now, the Grammys that year picked Debbie Boone, You Light Up My Life. This is just another example of how the Grammy Awards tends to find these one-hit wonders and give them all these accolades. Debbie Boone really, in my opinion, unless I'm missing something, really never amounted to much more than this one hit. In fact, I was laughing when I looked at the nominees for Newcomer of the Year. You have Debbie Boone. You have Sean Cassidy, who was just a little insider information, a teen heartthrob that Mrs. Metal Dude might have had an affinity for back in the day. You had Andy Gibb. And I was looking at this and I was like, you throw Leif Garrett in here and you've basically got the Teen Beat magazines from our youth. Not really a lot of great musical acts here, but a lot of pinup models for the 12-year-olds out there. The band they ignored was Foreigner. Now, Foreigner does get a nomination, but they don't win the award. I wrestled a little bit with, is Foreigner hard rock enough to get into the category with Riot and Motorhead? And at the end of the day, there's two really big bands that are out right now that sometimes are lumped into the hard rock category. Let's get it out of the way now. I don't think Foreigner is hard rock. I think they're more radio-friendly, kind of mainstream rock. And Meatloaf definitely, I think, falls not in the hard rock variety, but in the mainstream rock as well. Now, if you consider Foreigner and Meatloaf to be hard rock, these would definitely be amongst the biggest albums of the year. Foreigner's debut is an excellent album, and Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell, was iconic. So if I have to give a winner for Newcomer of the Year across the board, it has to be Foreigner. What a debut album from them. So, best hard rock heavy metal debut, Motorhead. Best debut across the board, Foreigner. No more Tiger Beat lists, no Sean Cassidy, no Debbie Boone, no Leif Garrett, no Andy Gibb, none of that. We're going to give real rock and roll. And really, when you look at the impact Foreigner and Motorhead and Riot had on music for the next decade, it really is interesting that the Grammys completely botched this award. We're not going to botch it. We picked the right ones. All right, let's move on to Musical Performance of the Year. (1977) Hard Rock and Heavy Metal Musical Performance of the Year. Our first nominee, AC/DC, with Whole Lotta Rosie. There's no doubt that Angus Young is a legendary performer. But I'm not sure that he gets the credit that is due to him. That sounds like two different things, right? That sounds like an oxymoron. One of the most legendary guitarists ever, but doesn't get enough credit. I think Angus is known more for his stage antics than he is his actual playing. But here, on Whole Lotta Rosie, I think you get the full effect of how great of a guitar player Angus Young is. AC/DC had their first kind of international album last year, and it was pretty good. But oh boy, do they come back. 1 year later, AC/DC is an absolute monster. They turn up the volume, and they put Angus front and center. This is an epic song. I could go with several songs on this album, but I'm going to go with Whole Lotta Rosie because I love the guitar solo on here. I love the guitar work from Angus Young. It is our first nominee, Whole Lotta Rosie by AC/DC. Our second nominee, one of our newcomers, Riot, with their song Overdrive. Mark Reale is another of the most underrated heavy metal guitarists of all time. I'm not sure why. Well, I probably do know why. Back to those crazy album covers. Maybe Riot never got the credit that they were due just because people never gave them a listen because they had some odd choices for album cover. Go back, do yourself a favor. If you love great metal guitar, go back to the early years of Riot and listen to Mark Reale. He is one of the best players ever, and he really shines on this track, Overdrive. Riot, our second nominee. Our third nominee, the Scorpions, with the song The Sails of Charon. If you want a catchy metal song, look no further than this bad boy right here. This song will get your toes a-tapping and your head a-banging. There isn't a more infectious riff in the history of heavy metal than maybe right here with our third nominee, the Scorpions, The Sails of Charon, and the great guitar work of Uli Jon Roth. Our fourth nominee, 70s legend Ted Nugent with Wang Dang Sweet Poontang. It is hard to not have Ted Nugent being in this category year after year after year. One of the most legendary guitarists of all time. Love the tone of his guitars, love the speed of his guitars, and the guitar solo on this song is ridiculous. Our fourth nominee, Ted Nugent, Wang Dang, Sweet Poontang. And finally, I can't help myself. Michael Schenker is one of my favorite guitarists of all time, and this is one of my favorite riffs of all time. UFO with the song Lights Out. I've talked about this song in other podcasts before, and one of the things I love about this is one of those first time you hear that kind of heavy metal gallop. This song is an absolute, maybe the best song that UFO ever did. And again, that's saying a lot considering they have been putting out banger after banger after banger for most of the decade. This one right here might be their best. UFO, Lights Out, is our fifth and final nominee. And the winner is UFO, Lights Out. Michael Schenker has an amazing career in UFO. The thing about UFO that's always been amazing to me is how commercially viable they were. They really are not a heavy band by any means. They have catchy tune after catchy tune, but yet there's no compromise on the heaviness of the guitars. Somehow or another, Michael Schenker plays some of the most explosive guitars, but in a very commercial way. I think Michael Schenker is a genius. I think this song should have been a huge hit in the 70s. You know, much like we talked about Riot. Not sure why UFO never just took off. No pun intended. Because they've got all the elements. They've got great vocals. They've got great instruments. They're catchy. They're radio friendly. Not sure what happened here. But if you go back and you want to listen to great, solid 1970s metal, look no further than UFO. They've got a great catalog. Now, the Grammys that year, interestingly enough, went with John Williams and the theme to Star Wars. Kind of ironic, a couple of years ago, I was griping that they ignored John Williams for the theme from Jaws, but I guess Star Wars, they just couldn't ignore him anymore. And maybe there was a little bit of a makeup here because of the fact that they missed him in Jaws. Star Wars has some great music. John Williams is an absolute genius. But you know what? We're going to stick with, across the board, UFO, Lights Out. I think it's that good. And I'm not going to quarrel if you think, well, you know, Star Wars, you know, that theme music is iconic, and it is. But it is interesting how some years on the instrumental side of things, the Grammys really just look at, you know, TV shows and movies. I was noticing here that Star Wars actually edges out the theme from Rocky, who's also nominated this year. So a pretty interesting year. But my bias is going to kick in here, and I'm going to give Best Instrumental of the Year to UFO for Lights Out. Now let's go to vocal performance. Our nominees for 1977 Vocal Performance of the Year starts off with Aerosmith and the song Kings and Queens. Now, I stated at the beginning of the program, I thought this album from Aerosmith was really a step back from their height of their previous two albums. A little bit of a disappointment, if I do say so myself. However, with Aerosmith, there's always a couple of tracks on there that are outstanding. Draw the Line, very good song. And here, I think the best song on the album, Kings and Queens. And whether or not the album itself was great or not, Steven Tyler's voice is always great. And he really does a fantastic job on this song. Kings and Queens, our first nominee from Aerosmith. Our second nominee is an old friend who's had some nominations in the past, but it's been a couple of years. Bad Company with Burnin' Sky. I've said it many, many times. You can't find a smoother voice in the hard rock heavy metal community than Paul Rodgers. And this song is one of those songs. The Sky is Burning. I love this song, and I love his voice on this. Our second nominee, Paul Rodgers, Bad Company, Burnin' Sky. Our third nominee, the metal god himself, Rob Halford, and Judas Priest with Dissident Aggressor. Judas Priest has really found their stride. There are so many great songs to choose from in this album, and Halford's voice has never sounded better. As they've progressed from Rock-a-Rolla to, we talk about finally finding their sound in Sad Wings of Destiny, now they've kind of kicked in to a little bit better production. And boy, Halford is belting out the tunes. Take your pick. There's at least 5 songs on here where he does some amazing vocal work. But I picked Dissident Aggressor because I think it's the best of the bunch. Our third nominee, Judas Priest, Dissident Aggressor. Now, the defending champion in this category is one Ronnie James Dio for the work he did with Rainbow and the song Stargazer. Well, he's back. Now, Rainbow did not put out a studio album this year, but they put out a tremendous live album called On Stage. And on that album, Rainbow does a song from a cover of an old Deep Purple song, Mistreated. You may remember this song because David Coverdale did an amazing version of this and won the Vocalist of the Year 2-3 years back. Well, now Ronnie James Dio says, Hold My Beer, and puts on a legendary performance of this song live. There is a lot of Ritchie Blackmore on this album. Remember back in the 70s, there was a lot of jamming going on. And so you would see, a studio song that's 5-6 minutes become a 12-minute song on a live album because the guitarist or the drums or whatever is going on for a long time. There's a piece of, Ritchie Blackmore's doing his thing. He does a great guitar solo. He's off doing some things for a while. When they come back into that song and Dio starts belting in back with the song, one of the most, the goosebumps the hair will stand up on the back of your neck. That good. Our fourth nominee, the live version, Mistreated, Rainbow. And finally, our fifth nominee, the Scorpions with We'll Burn the Sky. This is, again, Klaus Meine, one of the most underrated vocalists in the history of heavy metal. This album in particular, Taken by Force, the only problem I had is deciding which song am I going to nominate, because Klaus's voice has never sounded better. He is knocking it out of the park. song after song after song. I almost put the song He's a Woman in right here because two different songs. This is a much slower, it's one of those power ballads, while He's a Woman is just a really fast, heavy song. So many to choose from. Klaus Meine, Rob Halford are really at their just best right now. Just unbelievable vocals coming out of both of them. Our fifth nominee, the Scorpions, with We'll Burn the Sky. And the winner is Rainbow, Mistreated. For the second year in a row, Ronnie James Dio takes home the award. I have a feeling we're going to say that a lot over the next couple of decades. Ronnie James Dio is an absolutely amazing vocalist. He has that reputation. You know, people love Dio. Anybody that's ever heard his voice is mesmerized by it. This is a strong field. These are five of the, best vocalists you're ever going to hear. I've said it before. I say it on every episode, but it bears repeating. Right now, we are so fortunate. We have some of the best vocalists in the history of music right here. Don't overlook the strength of the vocals of 70s metal. Halford, Dio, the list goes on and on. Really lucky. Go out, listen to this music, and enjoy. I also want to give another award for Best Female Vocalist because Ann Wilson comes charging out with, let's face it, Heart's most iconic song, Barracuda. Ann Wilson brings Female Vocalist of the Year award and does hard rock and heavy metal proud. Now, that year, the Grammys went with James Taylor for Best Male Vocalist and a song called Handyman, which, it's about running around fixing the hearts of women all over town. I guess it's like the folk music version of Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, I suppose. James Taylor wins a lot of these awards. Someone really likes his voice. I am not one of those. James Taylor does not hold a candle to Dio, Halford, Klaus, Paul Rogers. So, Best Male Vocalist of the Year across the board goes to Rainbow, Mistreated. On the female side, the award that year went to Barbra Streisand for the song Evergreen, Love Soft as an Easy Chair. Barbra Streisand is considered by many a great female vocalist. And maybe by the definition, she probably is. But I don't find her music appealing in the least. I will put Ann Wilson up against Barbra Streisand any day. Because Ann not only has a beautiful voice, but she has a powerful voice. She's not singing some schmaltzy thing about sitting in an easy chair and no. Barracuda is greater than Evergreen. So my female vocalist of the year, not just for hard rock and heavy metal, but across the board, Ann Wilson and Heart. Now the group that year is the Bee Gees. How Deep Is Your Love? Oh, my disco heart begins to thump a little heavier. The Bee Gees are actually, now you talk about a talented bunch. The Bee Gees actually are very good vocalists. So, as far as a group goes, yeah, I'll give that to them. But James Taylor and Barbra Streisand, boy, I don't understand why people think that music is great. You put Dio and Ann Wilson up there, now that's a mixed tag team that I would vote for every day of the week. So again, great vocalists in hard rock and metal being ignored. Schmaltzy pop singers singing about, some such broken hearts or whatever. That's what we go with. Year after year, you see the same profile of singer. Like I said, I think I was looking, James Taylor has, wins this award like 5 times, gets nominated like 20 times. Dio's never received a single nomination that I know of. This is why this program exists, people. That is ridiculous. Enough about my ranting. Let's go to Best Hard Rock Song of 1977. Our first nominee for Best Hard Rock Song of the Year, Blue Oyster Cult with Godzilla. I love this song. Catchy, nice riffs. Blue Oyster Cult's a little bit like Aerosmith in that the album they put out this year, not one of their stronger efforts. A little uneven, if you will. But this monster is a great one. Oh no, there goes Tokyo, our first nominee, Blue Oyster Cult, with the great Godzilla. Our second nominee, we talked about this in the vocalist, Heart with Barracuda. There's something wrong with you if you don't like this song. This is Heart at its absolute best. Ann Wilson's voice, legendary. We were talking about, getting snubbed by the Grammys and all of that. Yeah, I found it interesting. And you see this a lot where this band is completely ignored. I think Heart finally starts to get recognized about a decade later. They kind of have a hit song. Their early work, some of this fantastic work, completely, the Grammys don't know it exists, right? Then, 30 years later, they give them a Lifetime Achievement Award when they missed all their great early work. The Grammys, trying to make up for lost time. I guess it beats, a sharp stick in the eye here, but they missed this. And the Grammys know they missed it, which is why they gave them a Lifetime Achievement. Ann Wilson, Nancy Wilson, love this band. Our second nominee, Heart, Barracuda. Our third nominee, haven't heard from these guys in a while, Nazareth, with their song Expect No Mercy. A couple of years ago, there's a theme here. There's a lot of bands that have had some really great albums and kind of stepped back. Aerosmith kind of took a step back. Blue Oyster Cult took a step back. Nazareth took a huge step back. A couple of years ago, Hair of the Dog, you could argue, best album of the year, right up there. It was really competing for best studio album for sure with Aerosmith, Toys in the Attic. Hair of the Dog, classic. And then they kind of put out a string of lemons after that. This is not a good era of Nazareth right here, but this song absolutely cooks. Our third nominee, Nazareth, Expect No Mercy. Now, the fourth nominee is a song, well, let's just get to it. Queen with We Will Rock You. It hurts me to put this in here because I am so sick of this song. You talk about a song I've heard, 6 million times in my life, every sporting event. And if you think it's played a lot now, you should have been there when this was the big hit. But that is the case. This was a huge hit for Queen. It was a B-side of We Are the Champions, by the way. I don't even think they really intended this to be the big hit that it was. But we have to include it. One of the biggest hits in the history of hard rock and metal. We Will Rock You by Queen. And finally, the legend, the Nuge, Sweaty Teddy, with maybe his signature song, as far as commercial goes, Cat Scratch Fever. When I was first getting into music, the first two bands that I really gravitated to were Kiss and Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent was a huge commercial success, still making great music to this day, one of the great all-time guitarists. This song has a lot of, locker room type of lyrics, but boy, is it good. Ted Nugent, Cat Scratch Fever. And the winner is Barracuda. When you look at the great music that Heart was putting out, this is right at the top. It had to be Song of the Year. All of these are great songs, but I do think Ann and Nancy really knocked it out of the park. There's a lot of sass in this song. The song was kind of written because of some gossip that was being said about Ann and Nancy, and the vitriol of the press, and you can tell Anne's a little pissed, and she really puts that emotion into the song. Love, love, love Barracuda. Let's move on to heavy metal song of the year. Our first nominee for best heavy metal song of the year, AC/DC, Whole Lotta Rosie. I think this is the best AC/DC song of all time. There's a few that are right in the running. So, there's a couple that would be under consideration, but this is definitely at the top of that list. Love this song. Love Bon Scott's lyrics. We talked about kind of the locker room lyrics of Ted Nugent. Bon Scott has some of the most amazing twists on lyrics that you've ever heard. Whole Lotta Rosie, great song. AC/DC, this is the era where they really take off and just do some incredible work. Starts right here. Nominee number 1, Whole Lotta Rosie by AC/DC. The second nominee for Best Metal Song, Judas Priest with the song Sinner. Similar to AC/DC, this is one of the best early songs in the Judas Priest catalog. We talked about this with the UFO song earlier. Really kind of love the gallop that's in this song. This was a staple of Judas Priest concerts for the next decade. Fantastic song. Had to be in here. Our second nominee, Judas Priest, Sinner. Our third nominee, one of our newcomers again, Motorhead with the song Iron Horse, Born to Lose. Truth be told, I did not originally have this album. This was a little bit before my time. I kind of picked up Motorhead just a little bit later, and this song shows up on their epic live No Sleep to Hammersmith. And one of the things about Motorhead is, well, let's just say it's really hard sometimes to, what is Lemmy saying? Like, I remember really having to concentrate and try to figure out the lyrics of some of these songs. And we didn't have the internet back then, people. There was no way to there was no liner notes on this album. So one of the songs that I remember was Iron Horse, trying to figure out, what is Iron Horse? Is it light? Is Iron Horse flame? Is it lame? Is it life? Is it, one of the first time when I finally realized you could get lyrics on the internet, one of the first songs I looked up was Iron Horse. What is Iron Horse? Me and my buddy would sit there and go, I don't know what he's saying there. Iron Horse is something. Put in your word there. So just a little funny story about that. But this song, back to why they won Newcomer of the Year. You can really get a feel for what Motorhead is about to become. And they show that on this song. There's a couple of songs on this album that's like, oh yeah, that's Motorhead. That's the band that's going to dominate in a couple of years. So love this song. It is our third nominee, Motorhead, Iron Horse, Born to Lose. Our fourth nominee, the Scorpions with Sails of Charon. Once again, my only difficulty was saying which Scorpion song would I be taking off this album, because Taken by Force is one good song after another. However, I picked Sails of Charon for one simple reason. My kids would strangle me if I didn't pick it. This is their favorite Scorpion song of all time. They make no bones about it. They said, Dad, you got to put Sails of Charon. That's the best Scorpion song of all time. So, one for the kids, and it is a great song. Again, the catchiest riff of all time. Our fourth nominee, Scorpions, Sails of Charon. And finally, we talked about this, Lights Out by UFO. I think this is the last great UFO song right here. Michael Schenker puts it all together. We talked a little bit about Aerosmith and Blue Orchestra Cult and some of these other bands, Nazareth, that really didn't put out their strongest music this year. I love Lights Out, but this album by UFO, I think they're really, one of the things that you'll see in the 70s and in the 80s is bands are just trying to get a radio hit. They're just trying to, and I think UFO kind of starts to become a little bit more commercial. Much happier with albums like Phenomenon, No Heavy Petting. This one's a little bit of a disappointment. But in the midst of that comes maybe my favorite song of all time of theirs. Lights Out, our fifth and final nominee. And the winner is da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Whole Lot of Rosie. AC/DC. Mwah. This album. Mwah. We're going to talk about this in our next segment, but you can't compete with this song. These are 5 of the strongest metal. One of the things that I really like, we've talked about this for the entire decade. When you really talked about great heavy metal songs, you really had Sabbath and you know, and a couple of other bands. Now you're seeing the heavy metal side of things becoming stronger and stronger. All of these nominees are very worthy. It just so happens, Whole Lot of Rosie, an unbelievable song, had to be the winner. Now, once again, when we get to the best song of the year, we have Debbie Boone. Remember her from the Newcomer of the Year, the great one-hit wonder. Pat Boone, her father, had a longer career in metal than Debbie Boone had. I don't think she had another hit after this. Now, I was around in the 70s. They played the heck out of this song. And it is a really good song. But, you know, it doesn't compete with Whole Lot of Rosie. And actually, this is one of those weird years. The Grammys actually declared it a tie. Because not only did Debbie Boone win, but so did Barbra Streisand for Evergreen. Which, again, somebody in the comments, please explain the appeal of Barbra Streisand, please. Not great music. And from what I can tell, not a great person either. So, you know, I think this Babs might have been the first Karen, right? Not the type of person that, you know, you give these awards to because they're, you know, a fine, upstanding person. Now, interestingly enough, one of the nominees for Song of the Year was Hotel California by the Eagles. Now, this is a show about metal. This is a show about hard rock. This is the time to give AC/DC and Judas Priest their flowers. But folks, you can't make this stuff up. The Grammys picked Debbie Boone and Barbra Streisand over Hotel California. I'm going to give Best Hard Rock Heavy Metal Song a Whole Lot of Rosie. But Song of the Year, it's got to go to the Eagles. That song is unbelievable. That song is one of the all-time classic songs. So we're here to rectify a lot of the hard rock metal, but there's a lot of injustices that are going on the Grammys. They clearly knew nothing about music. I mean, I guess they gave the Eagles enough of they gave them a nomination and then had them lose to Debbie Boone. Boy, like, I don't know who sits there at the Grammys and goes, boy, they really did a good job this year. They never get it right. It's amazing. Like you would think, the old joke, the blind squirrel's going to find a nut once in a while. Not this bunch. Anyway, AC/DC, the Eagles, what a great combo. But let's go to the big event now. Album of the Year. The theme of this episode is the concept of quality over quantity. We see many of the bands that we've been listening to over the past few years kind of take a step back. But here, the top 5 albums are of the highest quality we've seen in a long, long time. Let's get to them. Our first nominee, AC/DC, Let There Be Rock. It's always an amazing process to see a band make that jump. Their first album's okay. High Voltage it had its moments. But then this bad boy, Let There Be Rock, is leaps above what they've done in the past. Really put it all together. I love the production of this album because they just turned the knobs up and they turned the boys loose. The title track's amazing. Whole Lot of Rosie, Song of the Year. We've got Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. You got Go Down. This album is just amazing. Great step up by AC/DC, our first nominee. Our second nominee is also very similar, Judas Priest, with their album Sin After Sin. Much like AC/DC, just a couple of years ago, this was a band who hadn't found their sound yet at all. They had rock-a-rolla. Then they find their sound with Sad Wings of Destiny. But here, once again, I think this is the best produced album that they have in the 70s. Roger Glover of Deep Purple fame produces this, and he just turns it up and sets the boys loose. It is a powerful album, very similar to what AC/DC is doing. You have Sinner, which is one of my all-time favorites. You have Diamonds and Rust. One of the things that we'll talk about when you talk about Judas Priest, they had some of the most interesting covers of all time. Like sometimes you see a band take a song and they cover it, and it sounds just like that song, but heavier. You would never know. This was like a folk song by like Joan Baez. How did Judas Priest find this song, and how did they realize this would be a great metal song? I have no idea. Great song here. Dissident Aggressor, we talked about again. Calling the Priest, that song. Almost put it in for best vocals. It starts off slow and kind of weird, but once that riff kicks in, a great Judas Priest album. Our second nominee, Sin After Sin. Our third nominee, Kiss, with Love Gun. I will say this. Kiss had a first run with the original group of 6 albums that are tremendous. This is the last of those 6. It is epic. They kind of fall apart after this, to tell you the truth. We'll talk about Kiss later, but a lot of Ace Frehley on this. The title track's fantastic. This is the last of the great Kiss albums. Love Gun, our third nominee. Our fourth nominee, the Scorpions, with Taken by Force. The Scorpions have one of those stories where their trajectory does this number. Every album's a little bit better than the last album. And we start to see it a little bit in Trance, and we start to see it a little bit in Virgin Killer, and then this bad boy erupts. This album is from start to finish fantastic. A perfect album. So many great songs on here. One of the things that was the most difficult in putting this list together is picking which songs I would highlight from the Scorpions, because all of their songs are kind of on a same level of quality, top to bottom. If you're looking at just consistency and perfection of each track on here, this bad boy is one of the all-timers. Our fourth nominee, Scorpions, Taken by Force. And finally, Ted Nugent with Cat Scratch Fever. Ted Nugent is a bona fide star in the 70s, and this is probably his peak commercial success. And it is this is his third album. And unlike the other bands, he's been going for a while now. He's had 3 fantastic albums. Ironically enough, too, all of them a little bit different. The sound, Ted Nugent just tweaks it a little bit on each of these. All 3 of his albums, great. All 3 of them, very different. Our fifth nominee, Ted Nugent with Cat Scratch Fever. And the winner is... The last couple of years, picking the album of the year was kind of, I wouldn't say easy, because there's always a lot of competition. But I would say this year, the competition across all 5 of the nominees, probably the strongest. But the winner has to be AC/DC, Let There Be Rock. In the late 70s, who can compete with AC/DC? This is the original AC/DC. This is Bon Scott. He is a great lyricist. So many, and their songs are so catchy. I saw something the other day on the internet that said AC/DC was overrated. And I'm going to say this right here now. No. AC/DC is actually underrated, and I'll tell you why. If you go out and listen to AC/DC, they're great. But if you ever saw this band live, this band could take, I don't care how big of an arena you put them in, 70,000 seat football stadium, and they can put it right in the palm of their hand. This is amazing stuff. Do not sleep on AC/DC. Their late 70s run, amongst the best runs in the history of hard rock and metal, starts right here with Let There Be Rock. I could go on and on, but I probably ranted way too much on this already. Album of the year, Let There Be Rock, AC/DC. Now, interestingly enough, the album of the year, and I almost fainted. I think the Grammys got it right this year. Fleetwood Mac, Rumors. I didn't know the Grammys had it in them. They picked a great album for Album of the Year. And a rock album at that. Congratulations, Grammys. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and not say that Fleetwood Mac Rumors isn't one of the greatest albums of all time. I'm going to go ahead and give it to them. Album of the Year, Fleetwood Mac Rumors, beating out the Eagles' Hotel California, which also got a nomination, but rightfully lost to Fleetwood Mac. We've been doing this, at least, we've been going through the Grammys 10 years. I think this is the first time they actually got it right. Congratulations to the Grammys. Congratulations to AC/DC. And just because AC/DC won, and just because the Grammys got it right, let's also not paint over the fact that the Scorpions and Judas Priest, I'm going to call out those two bands in particular. Man, it was hard not to give them Album of the Year. Go back and listen to Sin After Sin. Go back and listen to Taken by Force. Two of the best heavy metal albums in the entire decade of the 70s. They just ran into a juggernaut. What are you going to do? Angus and the boys were just going full blast at this point. Now, this is the point of the show where I say, you know what? If you haven't subscribed to this channel, go for it. Ring the bell. Give it a thumbs up. If you want to listen to all of the great music, we're going all the way from the late 60s all the way to present day. If you want to know who put out the best music year by year, you need to subscribe to this channel and tune in with us every week, and we'll discuss it. So we're coming up on a year anniversary. So I've been making this plea. Hey, give me an anniversary gift. Subscribe to the channel. Give this a thumbs up. We broadcast these live every Tuesday, so come in and join us once in a while. Anyway, this is the Metal Dude signing off. As always, take care.